Dennis is on the line, and we wanted to jump in. And Dennis has been working in the jails, like Angela mentioned. He's worked in youth detention centers. He's been working at the Hudson County Jail for years. So we want to ask Dennis specifically about why it's important that we address trauma, and then also his link as someone working on the community and why is legislation important. Maybe he can bring this together for us as well. So I'll pass it on to Dennis.
Dennis, are you in here? Where's Dennis?
I'm here.
Okay.
He's here.
Hold
All
on.
right. Take your time, Phoebes. There you go. You take your hoodie off so I can identify you, please, sir.
Nah, there's no
No, it's okay to mask up.
No shape-ups going on for a while. Look at this guy.
All right, peace, family. Good to see everybody. My name is Dennis Febo. I'm the founder and CEO of Guazabara Insights. Guazabara means warrior. We do health and education services throughout the state of New Jersey, but focused in Hudson County. We do mentoring, behavioral assistance, therapy. We run all kinds of groups and recreational activities for the youth. We have music, boxing. And we've been working in conjunction with CMO, the jails, the juvenile detention centers, JDAI, JJC, state level probation, state level prosecutor's office. So we've had a lot of contacts because a lot of the work that we do really focuses on identity. And I say it for myself, I'm Boricua, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I ended up in Jersey City because my mom worked in the towers. So after 01, I've been in Jersey City, in and out. I was fortunate to get my education and get a master's degree and be exposed to a lot of experiences that none of my friends, nobody in my circle were exposed to. So because I knew my position of advantage, because I come from poverty, because I come from, what we call the hood, that I had the educational attainment to know and be able to apply these things. But as an individual, I had to learn how to work through, especially as a young man, the concept of trauma. My father was a drug addict. He committed suicide in 08. My mother had me at 16 years old. I was the oldest of all of my siblings. So I lived a tough life, a tough childhood. And because of that, once I hit a certain age and I started looking back, I started to see how much these kids could vibe with me because I was there. I understood the pain. I understood the suffering inside. I understood the anger and the rage and not caring about what anybody has to say to me, especially people from positions of authority. And because I myself have been jumped by cops and falsely charged and detained and I've gone through the system, I also understand the injustices that occur in our community and how those traumas take hold of our bodies, right? And that's been the biggest link, trying to get a youth to understand how they identify with themselves and then how they can tie that into their body. Because your subconscious is crazy how much even adults don't understand their own minds, right? They don't understand that the mind has levels and that somewhere in the back of your mind, you might have been programmed with a certain belief system or an agreement that executes automatically, right? And then that automatic execution is a behavior that the kids don't understand why they committed that behavior. Well, I just responded that way, or they made me do it. And here we try to put it in their shoes and say, by learning how to identify, not identifying with the trauma, identifying like truly is who you are as a spirit, as a being on this earth, what your purpose is, what you came here to do, and how your traumas kind of shape you in a way to get to the full execution of that, or hone into a specific community or segment of the community. So the trauma is real because most of the behaviors that we see, a kid deciding to grab a gun and pull a trigger, like most of us couldn't even conceive doing that, right? What gets a youth in their own minds into that position? And because I also run gang intervention, quote, I don't like calling it that, we say violence intervention out of Booker T houses in Jersey City. For the past 3 years, one of the biggest things is how we identify. If they identify with violence, nobody can stop them, right? There's nobody that's going to be able to say anything. That's one. Two, the code that exists, the cultural coding on the street, and how violence is part of that code. How do we override that code so that violence isn't the go-to? But, it's kind of a very tricky situation because for any one of us, if anybody did harm to our family, you'd have to have a violence prevention specialist come talk to me. right? So as human beings and as individuals, right, how do we get people to sort of modify this code of identity and recognize that violence isn't necessary in order to have a goal accomplished? On the street, there's a different code of law. There's a different set of rules. And one must understand that law and those rules in order to be able to learn how, like how before, using consistency and being present, right? And always showing by example, right? Because that goes to the body. They're seeing it with their eyes. They're having the experience of having an adult actually do the things that everyone is telling them to do. I don't know how many people I've met out there standing up, telling people, other people, how to be better in life, but they themselves ain't living it. And youth recognize that from the beginning, right? So automatically, from whether you're fake or whether you're authority or whether you're the system or whatever other antagonizing ages may exist for youth in our community, the youth are not going to listen and they're going to shut down. And they're real good at that. We all know that, right? Having experiences with them. How do we get a little deep and a little closer? And with the engagement part really has to do with how not only I identify as a mentor, as an educator, but also how I can show them how they identify, right? And because we don't really have structures in our community and our educational systems that gear towards the planning of the code of your own identity, whether it be racial, whether it be sexual orientation, whether it be gender, you plug in the identity construct. Down the line, if a person does not have a standing in that coding, then they're going to do as whether it's a subconscious response or they're going to do what other people tell them to do. Most of the youth are following what other youth are doing in order to appeal to a code. They can't be messed with. They don't want to be messed with. They don't want people to rob them. They don't want people to jump them. So they're going to have to start associating to these codes so that they know that the rest of the world can't mess with them. And at that age, we all forget, we think we're immortal, right? We're not afraid of death at that age. We don't think we could die. We think we're all powerful and all knowing, right? So how do we start to take it from how they identify? And this takes time. Culture, to modify culture takes time, right? And it takes a lot of investment and consistency. And as we go down the line, little by little, and we've seen it, we work with the Connective Vine and Sandra and Quadira, and being with them and seeing the evolution in the girls. It's funny because when you do work with youth, when they're 15, 3 years later, they're 18 and they're already way bigger and they're acting older, right? So it's also a very rapid paced process, that age. It's also the age where most of the violence is coming from. Most of the violence comes from boys 19 and younger. And there's a curve. Once they hit a certain age, for us, we know, hold on to them so they hit that age so that we know that we can get into their head and calm them down and get them towards a career and education. But at 15, 16, walking these streets, it's going to be really hard for any one of us to tell one of these kids, don't walk around with a gun. Because if I was 16 in Jersey City, I'd have a gun, right? Because it's that real out there. People are really dying, right? And it's easier for people who don't live there and are constantly hearing and having the experience of this trauma. You know, another example with trauma is the girls at Booker T, 4th of July. They started setting off fireworks and all the little girls balled up and started crying and screaming in the same spot, all around me throughout the basketball court. And it really broke my heart to see that. It's in their body. How do we get that out? Or how do we get them to understand that a lot of it, again, is processing of who we are as a people, who we are as a community, who you are as an individual, and give them the language that allows them to express that to the rest of the world. And I know, because we've had really, really good success stories with being able to do this. Now, again, a lot of these kids are already smart. They're already empowered in certain ways. All we have to do is kind of like shape and guide them in a certain direction. I got the young brother Nazir Mir on the call who just spoke before, who was one of my mentees, and he's a perfect example. Not only did he able to get himself to a certain position, he now works for CMO. He was a CMO youth who is now an employee of CMO out there telling other youth, like, to me, one of the most beautiful stories that I've experienced yet here, because it shows that it is possible, right? We already showed it that it can be done. When it comes to the solutions of it, we already know what the solutions are. is whether who wants to pay for it, who's going to receive the money, and who's going to be responsible enough and accountable enough to get it to where it needs to go. There's no need to have studies, breakdowns, percentages. We already know this. We've been studying this for years. What are we doing about it? Not just one, two, or in an organized fashion. In an organized fashion, because there's nothing more beautiful than having a bunch of leadership come together. The issue is our own identity structures. Some of us thinking, oh, well, I'm not from Jersey City enough, or I'm not black enough, or I'm not woman enough, or I'm not. So we get into that as the adults in the leadership, and it's almost impossible to get people coming together to form one collective unit to move in one specific direction, targeting what we need to target down the line. The biggest violence in our community right now is poverty. And while some people may have mentioned that people are walking around with $300 sneakers, I don't know none of my youth with $300 sneakers. When I walk into these people's homes and I see the poverty with my own eyes, they ain't wasting their money. They ain't got it. And it's a little bit condescending to hear something like that and disappointing. That's one. But now to acknowledge that poverty is the biggest violence that we have because economy is controlled. We are in one of the richest countries in the world. There's no reason we don't have the resources and the possibilities for our youth and our families to where they need to go. We've been hearing over and over the years that there's not enough money or where's the money coming from. But as I've been doing the work, people are giving back hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars from local to the state level. There's money. And we need to stop speaking in lack. We need to speak as if it needs to exist. How it needs to exist, who's going to take on the roles to make it happen, and let's get it done. Because once we have that, now we at level. Now, once we've put someone through that process as a participant and they choose not to do it, now we could talk smack. See, because I gave you the opportunity, or we all try to help you get there, but you turned it down. And we do face that in the line of work. Some people, we ain't going to drag the horse to the water. We can only work with people who want to be worked with. We try our best to engage and get to as close as possible and know that we can plant seeds, especially in these youth's minds, because down the line, they remember what you tell them, right? As they start to evolve and have experiences, they'll remember, yo, I remember when that person told me that day, putting that together now, I should have listened, right? And it's that consistency, that practice, that unification, and that organization, and I don't see why we couldn't do what we need to do. Final point, when it comes to identity and self-knowledge, we've already established Amistad Act. I suggest everyone actually read the language of the act, right? And there's already been a premise as to teaching our own culture and our history so that we have a proper ground in identifying who we are in the world and in this community, especially when we're looked at calling ourselves minorities in the world, right? There is already the law, but if the legislation is passed, who's going to enforce it? Right? So legislation is just on a piece of paper, right? Cops violate the law all day long, violating against what the piece of paper said. It's actually people on the ground, right? So the legislation is very important to get it to actually be the actual law of the land so that if anybody contested it, you could take them to court or you could take them through certain procedures to make sure and guarantee that you get the outcome you need. But if we don't have the bodies to enforce, right, or we're all waiting for someone to come and enforce it, then it's never going to happen, right? It takes us doing it. It takes us getting our skills, our knowledge, our technology, our economy, our way of building and conversing when we come into business groups and into circles, that the premises are always based on forward progress and positive energy. And there's absolutely no reason we couldn't move to where we need to move to.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, man. You're the king of that knowledge dropper. You're the knowledge dropper.
always so powerful, my brother. Always.
Thank you, man. Thank you. And I know, so there's a lot to unpack and follow with that. But for those that are watching this stream, we said in the beginning, that we wanted takeaways. So you got to follow the good people that are doing the work that are on these panels for today, and get involved in the work. So there's a lot of gems being dropped, and we need to follow the folks to get to that collective force that Dennis is saying. But we do have a couple other panelists in this segment that I definitely want to jump in and get Robin and Rebecca's input on that topic of trauma. When you're coming from the mental health side, I know Dennis just hit a lot about how a lot of our kids carry that with them. But from your perspectives and your work that you guys have been doing from a mental health services standpoint, I wanted to get your input, Rebecca and Robin, on the trauma piece. If you could touch on that briefly.
You want to start with Rebecca?
Yeah, you can jump in, Rebecca.
Okay, sure. So, I don't even know how to follow Dennis at this point, but I'm just so excited about everything you're saying. But to definitely follow up on the trauma piece, I think that when you're talking about violence of any kind, particularly youth violence, you have to take into consideration the intergenerational trauma that comes along with this. And when we're talking about violence, we know that we can trace this back several generations, and it's not only one or two families in the community, it's a shared event within the community. And so I think a lot of times it's not even seen as trauma. It becomes internalized and integrated and normalized as a way of life. It becomes a norm and almost an expectation. And so I don't want to get too heady, but when we are talking about trauma, there's a huge neurobiological piece that goes along with that. And these children are constantly in survival mode. They're constantly on high alert. They're constantly in fight, freeze, flight mode. That is a mode that has gotten us as human beings to where we are. It's in our primitive brain. It helped us survive as cavemen and cave people. And that mechanism, think about being in that state 24/7 all the time. It's exhausting. Everything is perceived as a threat. Every time you walk out your door, it's, I want to live today. I could potentially be killed today. I could die today. Everything is a threat. The way that person moved is a threat. The way that person looked at me is a threat. And so it's almost expected that something is going to happen to me and I need to defend myself. And particularly when we're talking about youth, there's that compounded with the developmental stage that these youths are in. Nobody talks about that. They say, okay, this child picked up a gun and shot someone. He or she is a criminal. But nobody wants to talk about where are they developmentally, right? Can their little brains actually process the gravity of the situation? No, because they can't, because they're not capable of doing that at certain ages. So we need to take that into consideration. And so I think when we go back to youth violence, we know that it is something that is particularly prevalent in our Black and Brown communities. And I think that we also have to acknowledge that these expectations aren't only within the youth themselves, but within the system. We know that our system is flawed. And I'm going to stop there because we know it. And so when we're talking about addressing the trauma from a mental health perspective, we need to talk about access, we need to talk about location, availability, resources, and first and foremost, quality of services. Nobody's going out and, out to the borders of the community trying to educate those that are providing the services. How can we expect that our youths are being understood and appropriately serviced when they're, experiencing these traumas? The people that come in and try to, assist or provide justice, they're not necessarily trauma informed or trauma trained. And so I think that's a huge disconnect when we're talking about getting into the community. The best way to penetrate the community is to start with the community. So we know that it's from the inside out. So even though it's a tall order to, help resolve a trauma by going back to the eldest generation of a family, we know that youth also learn by example. When they see things that are being addressed, when they see things being resolved, being worked on, and they have an understanding that violence is something that really shouldn't be a norm, and it shouldn't be expected, and it should be avoided, then they can start to really create a new narrative, because the narrative is intergenerational. If this is a script that's been passed down, great grandparents to present, and so to begin to change that, it is like a grassroots effort. We need to start in the community, work from the inside out. So I mean, you know, I could talk forever about it, but violence is absolutely a public health issue. And when we're talking about trauma, that is a whole new level of training that's needed for the people that are going to be out there really assisting the youth, because you can't teach the youth to understand what they're experiencing if they don't even understand what they're experiencing. And also, to really quickly piggyback on something Dennis said about holding trauma in our bodies, you know, our bodies create sensory memories. And so that is also intergenerational. We hear things, we feel things, we smell things, we taste things. Those are sensory memories that we carry with us. And those are the strongest memories we have. Even if we can't remember what we had for breakfast, we'll remember something that we smelled 25 years ago.
Wow.
So, you know, the body keeps score, which is actually the title of the book. It's a real thing. You should Google it. It's amazing. But, you know, when we see, you know, our youth not feeling well, not feeling themselves, depressed, body aches, oh, it's fine, it's growing pains, don't worry about it. It's freaking trauma.
Wow.
So we need to start addressing these things, because, you know, some of our focus and our resources are really going to the wrong places. And so I'm very passionate about it, but I think that there are so many layers to this onion. But I think when we're talking about violence, you can't not talk about trauma.
Wow. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. I mean,
Thank
you really hit it. You really hit it. I think I wanna hear from young person. So I think Dennis and Rebecca both set the stage in talking about our young people and what they go through. And I thought it appropriate at this time to ask Nazir, how does trauma look from a young person's perspective? You know, so you're a product of Jersey City school system and the community. You've been through your own testimony and story. So what do you have to contribute here that you think people should know?
That's a good question. Well, thank you for, having me. Thank you guys for being present. Just the little things that matter. To me, trauma, and Dennis, that's like he said, that was my mentor. He said it. That's how he said it years ago, and that's what made me be like, okay, yeah, you're gonna teach me this. So, trauma, it's something that we definitely are exposed to on a daily basis. It almost becomes second nature, and it's unfortunate because sometimes I have to catch myself, even when I'm thinking from a post-traumatic mindset to responding to certain situations. I'm still not exempt from that, at this age. I think it just looks like something that's like a clock that needs to be reset and that needs to be evaluated. Like, how we always set our clocks forward or backwards, for the seasonal shifts. And sometimes that needs to be evaluated. And if we don't, we'll be moving on time that isn't, valuable, or is just time that hasn't been updated. So, I mean, trauma is really, really one of those secret killers, in our communities, because not everyone can really differentiate, I hate that word, between what is traumatic and what is almost normal. Everyone wants to use this word toxic, and it's like a real, a real, what's that word? A viral word, that people use on social media, but people don't understand that, toxicity, the reality of someone or two individuals in a relationship who are uncomfortable with toxicity and think that to them it's how they express love, that's a reality. That's not something that's just like, made and we're just laughing at that. That's just, truly something that people believes. So it's really, the human mind is really something, fragile. But to me personally, as a 20-year-old, dealing with PTSD in the hood is real, because now I have to really look at my thoughts and look at my actions and my mistakes, and just accept the fact that, it is what it is in some cases, because, I'm a perfectionist. So every so often I would want to really change something about myself and go hard at it and be restless. So I think with, trauma, one thing that really helps, I want to talk about the positive sides, trying to build off of it. What really helps is accepting the fact that what we experience and what we've seen is like, it's almost added to our arsenal of how we view the world. So we can always take it and be like, okay, boom, I seen someone get shot, so I'm not gonna walk down that street, or be fearful, or you can look at it like, okay, I've seen someone get shot before, so I want to realize what makes people want to do this and why are we doing this. So it's almost like the outlook on the perception of trauma. I learned to accept certain things because I've been seeing so much. So as a youth, that's really the main important thing, just to me, accepting, because after a while you don't even really almost realize, I'm sorry, someone's at the door, you almost don't really realize, you know, what you have experienced in life and how that affects you until you see someone who help you open your eyes. So we got to help each other, not only ourselves, but each other. But I see kids every day, you know, people they want money, they want to be taken care of, they want to take care of themselves, and they'll do whatever it takes. And excuse me, conference call, and I think that there's a lot of important people in this call. But I'm gonna wrap it up on that note. That was my uncle. But long story short, trauma is really something that we need to look out for in our communities, and not something that we should, you know, be judgmental, because everyone is going through trauma, you know, and it's just so silent and subtle. We got to really be careful. The human mind is fragile. We got to keep refreshing and keep, you know, reflecting, and always, you know, self-help always works. It's these things that we just got to just be consistent with. So that's pretty much all I have to say on the subject.
Thank you, brother. Always appreciate you, man.
No problem.
Thank you.
God bless.
Do you want to go back to Robin?
Yes, I was just about to. Yes, Robin. So you want to wrap us up on the trauma talk, and then we'll finish off with Freddie and Aisha, see if they have any final thoughts from the hospital.
Sure. I think, you know, there's so many ways that so many different directions you can go into on this topic, but I think the one thing that I want to hit upon is that obviously there's, you know, clinical help out there for people who are dealing with trauma, but I also think there's just some practical, you know, on the ground kind of work that needs to happen in order to create a trauma-informed community, right? Because there's training out there for professionals to become more trauma-informed, but there's different levels to this. And I think organizations like, you know, Hudson Partnership and some of the other folks who are on this call, we all know that collaboration needs to happen in order for change to happen in all the pockets across the community that we need to become trauma-informed. And I think about, you know, there's two things that always kind of speak to me. You know, one is that, you know, we don't have problem children, we have children with problems, and hurt people hurt people. And if we're going to look at those two things and say, like, how are we going to affect change in those areas? It can't just be in the home, it can't just be in school, it can't, you know, we can't just pick these little pockets. It's got to be a full community approach. And I think about some of the basic things that have, you know, happened through collaboration, like, you know, the work that we've done with the courts. When I first came into this position, there was different judges at the juvenile justice, in the juvenile justice courts. And when we had a change in judge, we were able to meet and say, like, hey, you know, we see our kids as having experienced trauma, and a lot of them need treatment as opposed to incarceration. And how are you willing to work with us? And we've made tremendous progress. I think about the number of kids that, you know, in the past would have just gone directly to Jamesburg and wouldn't have had the opportunity to maybe be on a bracelet and have a mentor and participate in community programs. You know, I think about what's going on in some of our sister communities in Hudson, where the police departments are actually contacting the school systems when they have responded to a call at night. You know, they're not breaking confidentiality, but they're letting the school system know, like, hey, this kid had a really rough night. You know, we were called out to their house. There was some domestic violence going on. Like, you might see them not looking so great this morning. They might be tired. They might not be able to participate. Like, creating those types of collaborations across the community, I think, is so important, in addition to the clinical piece, right? Creating safe spaces, like, you know, Frank Gilmore's Educational Resource Center, like Haven, like what's going on with Sandra and Melanin Magic at the Cove and at Booker T, what Dennis has been doing over at Booker T, creating spaces for kids and young people to be able to be heard and to get support and to feel like they're not being judged. We need that too, right? So there's so many levels of this that I think need to happen. You know, we have certain schools that have been really great at carving out time for kids. You know, instead of having lunch, like you can have the support group. There's so many things that we can do. But I think it works best when we're collaborating really strongly together. And I think it interweaves, you know, the legislative advocacy, you know, the work that we're doing with Angela and trying to get more mentors into the schools. It weaves in juvenile justice and adult justice systems. Like how can we, as a group, we're going to have so much more of an impact. You know, if we're all working with Dennis on the Amend the 13th legislation, if we're all working with New Jersey City together on, you know, some of the incarceration issues, that all affects this community, and that trickles down to the youth that we work with. So I'm just a really strong believer in the idea that we can't, and none of us can do this in a silo. I think our systems want us in silos. It's easier for them to manage us if we're in silos. It's harder for people to, you know, to control things when bigger groups get together. But I think that's exactly what's needed at this time. I think there needs to be a shift in the community feeling like, hey, we know that the answers for our problems come from within our community, and the more that we can bond together and collaborate, the more successful we're going to be. So I think opportunities like this for like-minded people to get together and hear each other speak and hear the specialties and the different work that they're doing and figure out ways, like you said, you know, right from the beginning, Stephen, like this should be a call to action. You know, maybe what Dennis said really speaks to you and you want to reach out to him and work with him, or what Sandra's doing is something that's like incredible and you want to be a part of, or you're really interested in hearing more about the clinical piece of this from Dr. Vincente. Like, I'm hoping that folks listening to this are hearing this and processing it and thinking, you know what, I want to become more involved, because I think that's how we make change happen.
Absolutely, Robin. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who spoke before Robin. We're gonna finish up this segment. I'm gonna ask Freddie and Aisha a couple of questions, and then we're gonna move right into the next segment. Aisha, are you still with us?
Aisha, it looked like we lost her for whatever reason.
Okay, I don't see her, but that's okay. Freddie, you're still here.
Can I add one more thing before we switch the segment? I'm so sorry, guys. I just want to say one more thing.
Sure, no problem.
So I hope I have everyone's attention. So about this trauma and about, you know, just the circumstances that we are under at this moment right now. I was reflecting the other day and what I learned about what I just observed from the coronavirus and just Jersey City by itself, how we responded to it, how we are, you know, being impacted. The previous segment, we was talking about poverty and how poverty also definitely can influence trauma, or can be a starting factor of trauma, because when you're in poverty, you know, anything can cause an effect. You know, these things are what, especially for a youth growing up and our minds absorbing it. But from just being quarantined, and from, you know, even when I do have to go out and about and just, you know, seeing people, how we are not reacting the way that, you know, I'll just tell you, this is for me. I wasn't really, you know, thinking about, obviously for the general, you know, for everyone, for the public, but mostly for me, I'm just saying to myself, like, okay, how did I prepare for this? You know, from having to deal with violence every day to now there's a pandemic. You know, how do we prepare, you know, like physically, like our safety? And a lot of, and then I just came up with this revelation that's like, you know, nothing really matters unless you are taken care of, and that your basic needs and the basic needs of someone else next to you is taken care of. And then I just realized that, you know, like with the surplus of technology, of all sorts of just resources that we do have nowadays that just make it so easier to do things, we don't take the time out to really, you know, sit down. And we don't have to, you know, do this for everyone, but just for the person next to us. If there's someone who's in need, you know, a little bit helps, goes a long way. And, you know, just want to just put that out there, like trauma can be not cured, but it can be like combated. Like it's like almost a war. Like, you know, So there's always going to be traumatic things that happen. You know, it's the way the world is. But if we can just like personally be like, okay, if this happens, this is how I got to prepare for myself physically. And this is how I know that collectively, if I do this for myself and we do this all for ourselves, that and the next person, at least one person next to us, then like collectively, okay, we're content and those around us are content, and that we'll be good. Because the way people are like ill prepared, ill informed, and just misguided, even through a pandemic, that just shows the lack of community that we have. And not even to the point where we have to do all these rash things, like we gotta just go out and give everything and be on every corner. Like, you know, it's just the simple things that really matter. You know, it's only, Jersey City's only but so big, but that's just from a point of view that I was just sitting in the car one day and just thinking like, wow, like there's no way in this not too large but not too small city, like we aren't really taking much more care of each other effortlessly. You know, it's just effortlessly. But that's it. We could go to the next person. Just want to drop that in there. Thank you for listening, guys.
Thank you so much, Nasir.
And I need to finish that garden, Pam, but that's for another day, all right? I need to finish it.
I'll text you later.
All right, no problem.
Thank you. So Freddie, so I'm gonna pose the questions both to you. I have one for you and one for Aisha, but it's all relevant. Why is it important for the hospital to get involved in all of this? Unmute yourself, Freddie.
No, I think.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. We're good.
I'm on mute?
Yeah, you good. Yeah, young
you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's important that well, let me go from the beginning. Well, you know, they did their researches and statistics because they came up with a solution instead of this, you know, patching them up, sending them home. They got tired of doing that. And they seen that the black and brown community was getting killed off more than they was getting help. So what they did, they put together this program that I'm dealing with now with the trauma team, Project Hudson. And what they're trying to do is trying to give them hope with their situation that they first came in with. And by doing that, we supply them with resources and link them to these resources that might help them better themselves, you know what I'm saying, opposed to getting out of the hospital. You know, and what I found when doing assessments, trying to get to the root cause of what's going on and what led them to me, you know, a lot of them is lack of education, lack of employment. You know, we hope to change the narrative of their way of thinking and they surrounding by giving them resources, and hopefully that, you know, it could rub off, it could be contagious, because, you know, right now we dealing with this pandemic, right? The COVID-19. But to be honestly speaking, Jersey City been dealing with this COVID, and it's called COVID-18. You know, if people would have responded to it a few years back, it probably wouldn't have got this far, you know. But by me in here, I'm trying my hardest to help these young guys. I had one young guy said to me, because they call me OG. He said, OG, man, he said, when y'all was coming up, man, I know it was a lot different. He said, man, y'all had things to do. And I know if y'all OGs would have seen y'all stepping out of line, they would have chastised y'all. We don't have that. You know, it's just a thing of kill or be killed, even if you don't have nothing to do with the situation, just being in the area. And that's why I told my team, because we talked about front runners, a foot team, things of that nature. I said we need to bring situations to them. We need to bring resources to them, you know, before they get to the hospital, before, you know, they almost dead. We need to bring programs to them, set it in their face, you know, let them be curious. One day they're going to come in and look, One day they're going to try to find out what it's about. And then I feel that it might win because, you know, if you got something that's benefiting you, and I'm saying this from experience because I'm from the street. I'm from the street. When I got an opportunity, this guy named Michael Harris, you know, he put together a organization to where as though, you know, he was helping us get jobs and, you know, a coalition. So he got me in a union. I changed my whole outlook on life. I started respecting life. You know, I started working. I was appreciating my checks. I was appreciating saving money. You know, like, you know, I was appreciating giving good advice. And a lot of people who was by my side stayed by my side, and it was contagious, whereas though they started doing the same. You know, my whole surrounding that I'm with, you know, minus a couple, you know, but you can't change everybody. But minus a couple, you know, it rubbed off on them. They start working. They start leaving the life of crime or drug dealing or whatever and try this new thing called work. You know, the right thing to do, you know. But before, we didn't know how to do the right thing because we grew up in this poverty community that's all we learned was how to make fast money or how to rob, how to steal. We got to give them more opportunities, you know, like workshop programs. We have to, you know, bring it to their communities because right now the communities are so divided. We can't just set one in City Hall Annex and expect for, you know, Seal Our Court, Kerry Woods, Bidwell, and all of them to meet up in one place. No, that's not going to happen. We need to set programs in Seal Our Court, and Kerry Woods, and Bidwell, put it in their face, you know, so they can be curious enough to want to see what it's about, you know, because it's hard. It's hard. You know, like I said, the young man said to me, you know, earlier in my program, like, you know, we have no outlets. We have no resources, you know, and when they going through school, they even beefing in schools to where as though they dropping out of school. They dropping out of school because they scared to go to school, you know, and what we doing to help their situation. We saying we doing nothing but saying, damn, that's a shame. Another life lost. You know, another young man gained his wings.
Wow.
I want to give them their wings on earth. You know what I'm saying? I want to see them win. I want to see, you know, my community build up. I mean, we had fun growing up. You know, everybody just wanted to look good when we was growing up. And now everyone wants to see who can shoot who and who can hurt who first. And as far as when they in jail, like, you know, Angela said something about, you know, they being slaves, you know, to working in jail, this, that, and the third. Yes, I agree with that. I agree with her when she say that. But what they should implement while they're incarcerated is mentor programs, people to talk to them, people, you know, opposed to, like I'm doing, you know, talking to them opposed to when they get out the hospital from this trauma experience. And, you know, going to jail is trauma sometimes as well. Teach them at that teachable moment to where as though, you know, hopefully when they come back out, they frame a thought just be different, you know? And I mean, it's a lot of solutions, you know, but we need participants.
Yeah.
You're right, Freddie. You're so right, Freddie. I had my second question was to tell me a little bit of what you see, but you've already done that, right? You painted this picture of what's going on.
You know, I live in the heart of this. I'm not running from it. You know what I'm saying? And every time I get out my car and close my door, I'm giving somebody something to go on. You know what I'm saying? Because it's right here in front of my doorstep. You know, I even had a situation where a guy cut me in my face. because he was under the influence of that PCP right here in front of my door. Because he asked me, do I know how to fight? He quickly learned. But I ain't want to have to teach him that way.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
But Freddie, but Freddie, what we appreciate about what you're breaking down for us, and that's why we had you on, and you know, you gave us a complete picture of, you know, the trauma that's out there, the kids and the young people that you're encountering. So I mean, you know, the messages are kind of consistent to what we've heard today about what needs to happen. But I wanted really for the public and anybody that's watching this to know the impact of a program based in a hospital that now has a person like you.
Okay, I was about to get to that.
No, you're good. You're good. I know, but we just have like a couple other people to get to before we get to our ending of the program. But I wanted to acknowledge that your contribution was powerful and what you said.
Okay, but let me just finish this out. Like, you know, with our program, we started almost 2 years ago, you know, and with starting this program, we had a statistic rate of recidivism that was from 7 to 10% a year, you know, and being that I was doing this, you know, for almost 20 months now, we have a 0 recidivism rate, you know, and every year prior, you know, it was a consistency of people coming back. So, you know, it's a help, you know, and what the hospital is doing and what the resources I'm sending my clients to and the mentoring that I'm giving them, you know, they listen to me. If they get stuck in situations, yes, sometimes they do give me a call, you know, if they see me on the street, like I said, I'm in the heart, they'll talk to me then. And they give me, you know, what they did to, you know, make a difference in that situation from walking away just avoiding it. You know, so this program is definitely a great plus, you know, for the city, you know, but we just have to do more in the city and not just coming out of the hospital, because sometimes, man, getting to the hospital is too late.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, man. Appreciate you again, man.
Yes.
Thank you, Freddie.
You're welcome, Pam, and thank you for doing so much in the community as well. You and Frank and the rest of the people that's on the panel, because, you know, we all have to, you know, pitch in collectively and, you know, come up with solutions, resources, and, you know, and we got to stand firm on them, you know, and, you know, we can't stop. We can't stop. Like, you know, like they trying hard to get a solution for this pandemic. We got to do the same with our city, man, because, you know, we dying rapidly too.
Sir, appreciate you, Fred.
All right.
All right, so that's pretty much for that panel right there. Again, thank all the participants for that panel. Are we breaking for the TikTok, or are we going straight through to the next panel?
Straight through.
Yeah, let's go straight through.
All right, so our next group of our next group of panelists is my brother Dennis, Courtney, and Frank from Jersey City together. So we'll let them who's on? I see Frank first, so we'll start with Frank, have him introduce himself. I think Dennis is still here. So we'll go with Dennis.
Into the panel, just before we jump into the panel, DJ Chauncey has to sign off, so we just wanted to shout out and thank him.
Oh yes,
music, please.
Absolutely. Definitely shout out to my boy DJ Chauncey Black, man. Continue to turn the ones and twos and help us during this pandemic. Continue to be great, and thank you, my brother, for always coming through. You broke.
Love you, Chauncey.
Thank you, Chauncey B. Appreciate you, man.
Chauncey.
Much love and respect, man. Thank you all. Thank you all. God bless y'all.
Peace.
Keep it going. We can't stop and we won't stop. It's going to be crazy this year, the next couple of months, days. We have to lock it on top of those fathers that's making these kids out here. Seriously, stay on top of them.
Yes,
absolutely.
Stay on these fathers, okay? Thank y'all, man. I love all of y'all. Peace and love.
Love you.
Peace, man. Peace.
So, We'll go Frank. Frank, you in the building? I see Frank to my left. Frank, just give a brief introduction, who you are, what type of work you do, and things of that nature, so the people can be aware of, what you're doing in the community.
Great. So good evening, everyone. My name's Frank McMillan. I'm the lead organizer for Jersey City Together, which is an organization of 30 religious congregations and nonprofits in Jersey City. So it's all across the city, from downtown to the Heights to the bottom of Greenville. We are Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and secular. And the idea of it is that as a single congregation, you may have very little power. You put 30 together, you can make change on the issues that matter in your community. And we work on issues related to housing, to education, criminal justice, and safety. But it's an amazing group across lots of different divides, and have had the pleasure of working with lots of people on the panel, and it's been wonderful. So looking forward to this.
Okay. Dennis, did Dennis come back in yet?
Yeah, Dennis covered in the last segment. We could jump to Courtney on the juvenile side if she wants to introduce herself about the juvenile world and what's going on in New Jersey.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Thomas. I work with the state on an initiative, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, which is across the state of New Jersey, as well as in almost all of the states throughout the country, which is implemented through the Annie Casey Foundation. And essentially the purpose of this initiative is to, one, reduce the number of youth that enter into the juvenile justice system. Two, to increase the number of community programs for youth who are system involved, reduce the number of youth who are in detention if they are system involved, and really focusing back into the success of youth. If they do come in through the system, how can we ensure that they are successful when they leave the system? Through that, we have been able to implement different subcommittees, different action areas, and different collaborations between the community and different stakeholders who work in the system, but really focusing on how to change hearts and minds of those who work in the system.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us, young lady. So Dennis left. I guess I'll speak on a little bit of Amendment 13th, as I was with Dennis along the lines of this fight, and we've been to different states, namely Denver, just trying to see how they found the way to eradicate slavery within their constitution. So for those of you who don't know, slavery is essentially eradicated in the United States with the good old exception clause, and that's the exception by punishment by punished by crime, a crime of punishment. So technically, you're technically considered a slave, so as long as though you committed a crime. And the thing we're trying to push around Amendment 13 is we're essentially trying to get the exception clause eradicated. We don't want you to be a slave at all, because a lot of times organizations and entities have the ability to take advantage of individuals. So just real briefly, say for instance, an individual commit a crime, they go to jail, they can be working for a corporation while they're in jail. And if they come home, they will apply for that same job or a different job, but within that same corporation. And then it will subsequently be denied access to employment because they have a criminal record. So that's the work we're doing around Amendment 13. And this panel is predominantly going to focus on criminal justice measures. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Steve to ask Courtney and Frank some more questions as it relates to criminal justice.
Yeah, definitely. Let me see if am I unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted. I hear you,
Okay,
Steve.
cool. So so Courtney, I mean, you talked about changing like hearts and minds of a system. I mean, you know, what are the outcomes? What are the possible outcomes with some of the alternatives that you're talking about? What do those alternatives look like? And what are the possible outcomes in New Jersey in the juvenile world of reform that you could educate us on?
So really quickly, some of the alternatives that are implemented some of them are really basic and some are really advanced. So a basic alternative to detention would be a bracelet that a youth or someone would wear if they're on home detention or they're on a detention alternative, and it can go from an evening reporting center all the way to alternatives such as checking in through FaceTime with your probation officer so you don't have to come in and all of that. But really focusing on the alternatives that are community-based that allow youth to stay home, so they're not in detention awaiting the disposition and awaiting the outcome of their juvenile case. So really focusing in on how can we take youth out of the detention center, put them back into their community, really keep them engaged, focus on school in their community, focus on success, as opposed to keeping them in detention for up to 90 days pending the decision in a case. So the outcome of some of those detention alternatives is really in ensuring that the detention numbers have reduced. So prior to JDI coming in, we were at over 120% capacity. So youth could have been in a detention center in a cell built for 2. There could have been up to 5 youth in that cell. As of now, we are under 30 youth at any given time across the state in a detention center, and the majority of our detention centers have closed. So really implementing these alternatives have been able to give judges and attorneys other options to keep youth out of the system and keep them in the community. Some of the outcomes that we've also seen is really the success of youth in their community. So really successful on probation, really getting involved in an increase in our diversion program. So a lot of the misconception is if a youth is charged with an offense, they automatically go to court. There are many steps prior to court involvement that are available, such as a station house adjustment, a court diversion program, or curbside adjustment that really allows youth to avoid going in front of a judge and be able to stay in their community while they're finishing up maybe something like community service, or really going back and doing a statement with, if there was a victim involved case, really doing a statement with that, or just really staying out of the system. That's the overall goal of that.
Okay.
Wow. So you said 120% capacity, which it was like over capacity when this all started. So with everything you're saying, in the juvenile detention world, how do those numbers look today?
So essentially, Jamesburg, which has been one of the, has had one of the highest admission rates, we are under 50% capacity at Jamesburg. And across the state, almost half of the detention centers have closed. So for instance, there's no detention center in Hudson County, which has been a positive because we have seen a reduction in the use of detention centers because we have seen an increase in our detention alternatives and our diversion programs. So youth are staying in detention less amount of time. They're being released a lot sooner. Understanding that a detention center is temporary, we do not want it to be a long-term facility. So the expectation is to get youth out of the detention center within a week span. So really being able to reduce those numbers under 30. So at least in Hudson County, which is one of the counties that I do work in, our detention center numbers are under 25 and under at any given time throughout the month or on any given day.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's incredible progress. And so Frank, in switching gears into the adult criminal reform needed work, what is the initiative that Jersey City Together has going on to really start reforming the adult side of this world?
Yeah, so, and I think just building off of the last panel about the scale of some of the problems that Jersey City is facing, right? So I think, and then I'll turn to criminal justice within that, right? So in Jersey City, there are 40,000 households. That's 40% of our city that's in housing stress. 20,000 households are paying half of their gross income towards their housing. And that's before we had 20+% unemployment that's happening as a result of this crisis. So the stress on families in Jersey City is significant overall around housing, around education, which folks were talking about mental health and those sorts of things. We've seen cuts to social workers. We've seen cuts to child psychologists because we're $125 million underfunded. And I think we're going to see to some of the conversations about power, right? Like we're going to see this sort of drive to be austere and to not spend money on kids and not spend money on our schools at a time when our kids are most in need, when they're most being disinvested in. And so I think in that context, then you turn to criminal justice that we're facing. So over the last 9 months or so, Jersey City Together has been listening across Jersey City in our congregations and in nonprofits on the streets about to people who've spent time incarcerated and family members of those who've been incarcerated. And I think what we saw was we spoke to 600 people. and began to hear amazing sets of stories, right? All different across the board, from their treatment when they were inside prisons, to the ways in which they were upcharged at times, to the experience of trying to get a job when they came home, the inability to get a driver's license, all these sorts of things that form a wall for people. But I think the thing that stuck with me, and I think is important in the context of this moment, is that conservatively, right, 50,000 Jersey City residents who live here today have spent time incarcerated. Right, so we're in a town of 250,000 or so. So about 20% of the city has spent time incarcerated. So you imagine that's number of people that is having trouble getting jobs, or having trouble having barriers put in front of them in those sorts of ways. That scale, which is repeated across the state of New Jersey, more than 1 million people in the state of New Jersey have spent time incarcerated. We don't talk about that issue enough as a city, as a state, in part because I think some of those numbers are invisible. But when you think about 20% of people having that struggle, you can't solve issues of housing. You can't talk about issues of education if you're not thinking about the trauma that people are going through, if you're not thinking of the scale of need that's happening in our community. So I think I'll end with this, is that when I think about this issue, or any of the issues that we're talking about, it's at their heart, they are issues of power, right? It's not an issue of housing or education or criminal justice. This is about power, and that certain communities do not have the same amount of power to make things happen. So the only way that we can actually address this is to build the power necessary to move the ball. So that's why there's 40,000 families that are in housing stress. That's why the criminal justice system has held whole communities back in our city, in our state, and across the country, is because we need to change the power dynamic and make sure that certain voices are heard more than they're currently being heard. Because the Goldman Sachs of the world, the big banks are being heard in real ways. They're going to be heard through this COVID-19 pandemic. The challenge is making sure the voices of ordinary people, and particularly those who are most vulnerable, are at the table. And that means organized people, organized money, pushing together in one direction.
That's a great point that you made there, Frank. I do want to chime in just a little on Courtney. She was saying how it's only 25 or less juveniles incarcerated in Hudson County. And while some may look and say, wow, 25 people is a lot, I vividly recall when there were over 25 individuals in one unit. So that's a huge progress, a huge step in the right direction by having all of these, detention alternative, the available programs, the in-community services with the mentors, the clinicians, and everything. So that's just huge right there. And also, Frank, you cited a lot of numbers, but I would love to see the number of, you said it's over 1 million individuals in New Jersey who have been incarcerated or encountered the criminal justice system as an adult. I would love to look at the numbers of adults who encountered the Juvenile Justice Commission, just to see the correlation of those numbers, because I'm of the opinion that individual who encounter the Juvenile Justice Commission is more likely to subsequently encounter the Department of Correction system as well.
Absolutely.
I think that's right.
Absolutely. I know it's not my time to chime in, but I was just loving, the information that we're receiving on this, and it's a huge problem. And I wanted to ask Courtney, how is it, or do you even have any information on violence that takes place in these different detention facilities, specifically Jamesburg, like when youth from different areas are incarcerated for outside crime, they then come together, how is that happening? Or are they tracking those numbers of violence happening with different sets of youth from different neighborhoods in the juvenile detention centers or the jails, Jamesburg?
Yes, so we definitely at the Juvenile Justice Commission track that. All of that information, if there's an incident or anything, it has to be documented. It has to go up the chain. It has to be essentially relayed to the respective parties, and it has to be dealt with. One of the things I will say is with the increase of the different counties that are going into the different detention centers, it has been a little difficult for some of those detention centers to kind of grasp being able to house youth from different areas in the same detention center. There's always been a plan in place through the commission that detention centers have to follow, and they've been doing a better job at doing that, really being able to separate youth if they have to go to a different detention center because there are issues in one detention center to reduce the amount of violence. If they're able to bring in a mentor, someone who can kind of de-escalate the situation or really talk to the youth and be able to have that conversation. A lot of our detention centers are open to that and really look to have those relationships. So we do track that. There is a tracking mechanism. It's not public, but it is internal, and that is tracked. So they do have a mechanism in place to figure out how to deal with that.
No, and that's great. That's absolutely great. I don't think it should be public either, but just to make sure that they're tracking it, though. I think that's absolutely a great thing.
And Pam, I will say this, which was relatively interesting, is that you see the youth go at each other in Jersey City. For the ones who do end up in Jamesburg, they're more likely to be in cahoots because it's always kind of like a North Jersey versus South Jersey thing. So I've always found that interesting that you kind of go at each other's head while we're here, but when you're in there, you kind of go along to get along.
Right. And I know we got to end, and I just want to conclude this segment with Frank. Go ahead, baby. Yeah,
okay. I just wanted to piggyback on Frank's comment earlier about having a voice at the table. One of the things I do want to stress is when I first came into this work, the system made decisions for youth without understanding their family, their community, where they came from, the trauma that they've experienced, things that they deal with on a day-to-day, their educational history, and essentially their family history. So one of the things that I think is really important is understanding that, one, we do pour a lot of money into, although Hudson County doesn't have a detention center, we have a lot of services that are outside of Hudson County for Hudson County youth. So I do want to stress, really being able, one of the things we've been really trying to do is focus in on the resources that are in Jersey City and Hudson County for the youth who live here. But also really having the voice of the community and the youth at the table has been really effective in changing the numbers and changing the narrative. So I think it's really important to understand if you do want to be a part of the work, there is a space for your voice at the table, and it's a voice for the youth who are otherwise not heard. And I think that's really important that we recognize that the system is willing to make decisions for our youth without asking, without inquiring about their history, inquiring about their current circumstances. But one of the things I will say about our current judge in Hudson County is she's very open to hearing, opinions and support from community members and outside stakeholders. So I think that's really important to kind of hone in on, is that the voice needs to be at the table. So moving forward, we really want to highlight being able to bring that voice front and center to speak for the youth.
Absolutely. And we definitely love Judge Maynard, and we believe that she has the best interests of the youth and their families in her heart. And I just want to finish off with Frank. I want to, because I came in on the criminal justice reform team with you guys, and we've been diving in, and you guys have done marvelous work doing the research, getting facts, getting the numbers, and figuring out how it has impacted Jersey City as a whole. And speaking as a ex-offender, and so I always try to make people understand the ex-offenders' plight, right? Specifically with males, because as a woman, I didn't see many barriers after getting in trouble when I was in my early 20s. Now I'm 45. I didn't see the barriers as a Black woman, right? I was able to go get my education, get a master's degree, move forward, do what I needed to do, and it never really posed a problem. But for some African-American men, Latino men, specifically people in my own family they haven't had that, so they go and apply for the job, and automatically it seems like you know, as a Black man, as a person of color, if you're male, it seems like the odds are really against you, as opposed to a female who's coming from, you know, that incarcerated lifestyle. But I just feel like as a male, like it's totally like not opening or inviting to, you know, do better with your life, or, you know, the resources are in front of your face. So I really appreciate the work that you guys have done, specifically with that, you know, population of people. I think it's very important to tell that story.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing I would add into this, you know, following on from what Courtney was saying, is that, you know, I think we have to think bigger around this stuff, right? Like, when you're talking about 50,000 people in Jersey City, and the programs that currently work here are serving a relatively small number in comparison, we have very good steps that are taking place. I want to be clear on that. But I think we have to recognize the scale of the need and how we actually target resources in that way, right? And we're seeing the impact of that right now. So our organization has been pressing throughout to get people who are incarcerated in jails and prisons actually tested for COVID-19. And we're being told, you know, in some ways that we don't have the resources to give people tests because those folks don't matter in the same way that someone in a nursing home does, or those sorts of things. And I think that scale and understanding of population is not going to change unless we shift the conversation, unless we shift power to really push this, because it can't be something we don't talk about if we're going to impact housing and education in our city and in our state.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So we're gonna go right into the next segment, or?
Yeah, let's just go right into the next segment, and then after this, we'll announce the winners of the TikTok, whatever that thing is.
TikTok. You know what it is. So thank you for all the panelists. And like Frank said, we're going to go straight through. I mean, we covered a lot tonight. We had so many speakers. This was a marathon of discussions. And it was, you know, we covered it all, and it was really great. And we did have a lot of our youth and our community members create TikTok videos that were fun, they were family, they were positive in message. And we really need that now more than ever. So when we finish up this last segment, this last talk, we're gonna highlight those videos and announce some prizes that those folks are gonna get, which they really deserve. So we're excited about that, and that's how we'll end.
Absolutely. And thank you to our panelists who are still holding on and with us after your segment has ended, right? Thank you, guys.
Oh yeah, shout out to everybody.
Yeah, we appreciate that too.
So Pam, who do we have up next?